Looks like some people are in Palo Alto, calling in from campus, New Mexico, Washington, Menlo Park, Greece. Very cool. Some more Texas and California. Let's see, people are still joining in here. I think so far Mandy has the farthest, calling in from Athens. Canada, a little more international.
All right, I think we have enough people to go ahead and get going. So hi everyone, and welcome to Stanford Women in Business's Tech Week. For today's Fireside Chat, we are so grateful to be joined by the incredible Jacky Wright. SWIB's President Brooke will be moderating our discussion today. But before handing it over to her, I want to encourage you to submit questions throughout the event using the Q&A function. We'll have some time at the end to answer them. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us, with special thanks to Ms. Jacky Wright, her team, and SWIB for participating in and putting on this event today. I'll now pass it over to SWIB's President, Brooke, for a few words.
Hi all, and thank you so much for joining us for SWIB's first ever virtual Tech Week. Stanford Women in Business is the largest pre-professional organization for undergraduate women on Stanford's campus, and we are committed to providing education, community, and networking opportunities for rising female business leaders. Through workshops, conferences, community treks, and speaker series like this one, we strive to cultivate opportunities for mentorship, career guidance, and industry exposure. I'll now pass it off to SWIB's Executive Vice President, Casey, who will introduce our incredible speaker.
We are honored to learn from our distinguished guest today, and it is my distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce Ms. Jacky Wright. Jacky Wright is the Chief Digital Officer and Corporate Vice President at Microsoft US, where she inspires and leads teams to help businesses leverage technology to drive innovation, adopt sustainable and accessible business models, and digitally transform. Wright rejoined Microsoft in 2019 after completing a 2-year secondment as Chief Digital and Information Officer for HMRC, the British Government Tax Department. Jacky has extensive experience leading large-scale organizations, driving digital transformation and market-making solutions. Wright is widely recognized as a transformational global leader, innovative technologist, and STEM advocate. She uses her broad platform to drive thought leadership, not just for the positive impact of digital transformation for business, but also for social, economic, and environmental change. As a woman of color, her passion, advocacy, and influence to create a truly inclusive world is demonstrated in the various forums where she regularly speaks on diversity, digital inclusion, and the power of inclusive leadership. Welcome, Jacky.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
We're so honored to have you here today, Jacky. And to start off, it's clear that you've had an incredible career that's taken you through many different industries and roles. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your journey to get to where you are today?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to encapsulate a long journey in a few minutes, but I'll see what I can do, right? So where do I start? You know, I start by where I was born. I was born in London, you know, and I come from a large eclectic family. I think they call them eclectic because, you know, when you have a large family, it's easy to come from different walks of life, different backgrounds. And, you know, I think I would start out by saying I was shaped by my family, right? My dad was in the Royal Air Force. He moved from the Caribbean to the UK in a time when there weren't many people of color. And so, you know, he had those hardships. He didn't instill them in us, but he instilled in me that I could be anything I wanted to be, right? So I never knew that there were barriers. And he always used to say, you know, don't worry about what you do, worry about who you are. and what you're going to do as an individual. And are you going to shine a light or cast a shadow every time you interact with people and the relationships you should have? And so that kind of formed my foundational element. You know, I knew that I was going to university. Education was the foundation of everything. So, you know, there were no questions about going to university. So that's where I started. Then I came to the US. And I went to university in the US as somebody who was different, who spoke differently, who, you know, looked different, you know, not used to being in that environment, and had to adjust culturally to an environment. And that kind of taught me how to adapt a little bit, you know, wanting to fit in, feeling different, looking different, sounding different, caring about whether I fit in or not. You know, all of those things kind of helped shape me as well. And then, you know, while I was in university, I got a part-time job. And in the bank, I was doing a bunch of manual stuff that there was a computer sitting in the corner, and I said, oh, let me go see what's going on over there. Went over there, and wow, there was Lotus 123, way before any of your time, you guys on this call, but Lotus 123, which is kind of like Excel. And I automated my work. And then I go around the bank saying, hey, what are you doing over there? I could really put this on the computer for you. And I got this little reputation, you know, okay, we have a problem. Who can we ask? Oh, you know, that little black girl down there in that department there, she can help us with that. And so there was Jacky, right? And so they said, hey, how can we help you? We recognize, you know, really talented. And I said, well, this computer stuff is kind of interesting. And so I haven't graduated yet, but I'd like to go into that department so that when I graduate, you know, I can have that experience. So I was bold enough to make the ask, right? And they said, sure, we'll put you in that department. And then in that department was one woman. Imagine tech leaders, tech people, nerdy tech people, only one woman. And she took me under her wing and she says, hey, Jacky, let me help you navigate. This guy, watch out for. This one, he's pretty good. And so she just taught me all about how to navigate my environment. And what that did for me was really help me understand what role I need to play in terms of, you know, nurturing and taking someone under their wing. And so then when I graduated, I decided I wanted to go to California. Didn't have any real reason. I just wanted to go to California. And so I took a job in California. And so, you know, that really started the career of being in many different places. And here I am today, having done what I think really had some great experiences. I was a DBA. I became a project manager. I worked on first client server applications. You know, then I started large scale ERP type, SAP. And then it just grew from there. And here's where I am today.
Wow, what an amazing journey. And I really love what you say about kind of learning that adaptability early on and the value of education. And, you know, today we're joined by so many bright up and coming female leaders and technologists. And so I'd love for you to discuss a little more, maybe some of these challenges that you faced as a woman and a woman leader in technology. Sounds like you had some great mentorship that helped you work through those too.
Yes, and we can talk about, you know, the power of storytelling to bring stories to life, right? To help folks understand. And so now let's look at Jacky, right? If you saw Jacky out in the street, would you say, hey, that's the Chief Digital Officer of Microsoft? Who, right? And so my job is to help break stereotypes, walk into a room and help people see that they can be and do anything, because there'll be lots of people who look like me, who feel like me, and feel that they can't be, right? And so I'll give you one big story that really helped pivot me in terms of how I thought about myself. So I was responsible for putting in a system, and one day that, you know, the guys in infrastructure, which some of you are techie guys here, so you might the infrastructure guys were putting in a new operating system, which was going to blow up everything I was doing, and it had not been tested. And so I went over to them and I said, hey guys, you guys have put in this system. I haven't tested it yet. And you know what's going to happen? And the guy says to me, tough, and he kind of is expletive, tough. And if you don't like it, go talk to the CFO of the company. And I thought to myself, okay, let me evaluate this situation. If it fails, I'm going to get fired. So what do I have to lose by going to the CFO of the company? So here I go. I trot upstairs. And again, I'm like 22, right? I trot upstairs and I knock on the door and I say, may I speak to you? You don't know me, but I'm responsible for your earnings report. And here's what's happening. And so I told him, and he sat there and he looked at me for a bit and he said, here's what you do. Go back downstairs and tell them that I said, until Jacky's ready, I'm not ready. Wow, that was amazing, because what that taught me was the courage, right? I evaluated the circumstances, right? In terms of, Jacky, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I took a bold move to really say, here's the data, here's the facts, and here's what's going to happen. And then the consequences worked out well in that scenario. And so, you know, again, having to overcome these types of things really starts with your mindset and how you approach it.
I love that story. I think that's such a fantastic example. And to build off of this idea of courage, and with so many transformations throughout your career, what has been one of the most challenging or riskiest decisions that you've made, and how did that decision play out? What did you learn from it? If you have a different story.
Sure, and you know, that the decision, and I wouldn't call it risky, but I call it a decision of choice. I had an opportunity to go work for Microsoft. And I thought it was like the best decision. I was going to make that decision and I was going to move. And now at this point, I'm married with young children. And I evaluate and I talk to my family, and my family say, they don't want to move right now. And so I say to myself, what am I going to do? And, you know, I look at this, I'm like, oh, this is really great. This is something I want to do. And I turned down the job because for me, you know, risky proposition, but for me, it was more important for me at that point, for my family's well-being. And that was what was the priority at that time. So I made a decision and didn't work out that time, but I did come back, you know, some years later, you know, some years later, I was at an event speaking, and the Microsoft recruiter came over to me and said, Jacky, hey, we'd really like to hire you. And so here I am. And so I look at that, I look back and say, I took a risk. It was from a career perspective that I didn't want to take the role because what was important to me at the time. In hindsight, it was the right choice, right? I try not to look back and say regrets. I look back and say it was a choice I made because it was the right choice at the right time for the right reasons. And here's where I am today. And so that was, you know, it may not be a work per se, but it's work and family. And as people, individuals, women, we have to make these choices, right? And so you have to understand within yourself, when is it right to make the right choice based on your circumstances.
Absolutely. Well, and I know another big kind of one of those moments for deciding was when you took a civic leave from Microsoft in 2017 to work for HMRC, the UK tax department. And can you walk us through that decision-making process and how you knew it was the right time to make that move in your career?
Yeah. So for most of my career, again, I speak from a place of understanding, I think, what it's like to be different. And then having this, so, you know, what I didn't tell you was that my major in school was political science first, which was, you know, I wanted to solve the world's problems. And then I fell into technology. And so this ethos of wanting to help from a social perspective runs through deep in my veins. And so I'm always thinking about how can I use my platform to help do what I need to do to leave the world in a better place than I came into it. And so when I got that call for the government, it was not only a challenge, which I love a big challenge, and I know that. So how do we digitally transform this tax authority for a whole country? But it was also about what are the social things I could do while in government to help affect and change the outcomes of people's lives. And what better way to do that but be in the heart of government, where I can understand policy, where I can understand how we can provide services to citizens to improve their lives, economic mobility, all of those things. And so this notion of wanting to do good and social impact was why I made that decision. And, you know, I talked to my boss at the time and I said, look, here's an opportunity I just can't lose. And here's what I'd like to do. Again, you know, the courage to say that and then go in, and it turned out well. It was like, we have a civic leave program. Perfect, you can go do this. And that's what I did. And it was one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life.
That's so wonderful. And I'd love, I mean, I know that you've been a tireless advocate for social impact and inclusivity, especially in the world of tech. And so I'm curious how else you've used your platform for societal impact. And as we enter the working professional world, how do you recommend students like us can best support and make change?
So I think the benefit of this group of folks is that you live and breathe social impact daily. You know, I think it's in the ethos of millennials, Gen Zers. I mean, it's just part of what you want to do. And so I'd say, think about what your moral compass is at all times, as you embark on your job, as you embark on your life's work. And then think about, you know, I always say, think about what your dash is going to be between the time you're born and the time what is the impact you're going to make in life? What is your dash going to be? And so as you do that, you then take on roles, you'll start businesses where the social fabric of what you do is about the social outcomes. I mean, let's be frank. At the end of the day, you know, I think some of you have international relations as a major, computer science, management science. At the end of the day, it's about solving the world's problems. It's not no more, no less, right? And so when you start from that point, how can I do that in a way that is socially good? And so my recommendation to you is to go out there with your moral compass at hand, to think about how you are going to solve the world's problems, utilizing whatever role you have, whatever technologies and solutions that come to bear. That is the ethos of who we are as an individual and as a society.
Wow, I love that. I love what you said about social fabric being all about social outcomes, I think. And we all have so many different tools. It's exciting to think the change we can make. So shifting just a little bit, I would love to talk a little bit about your current role at Microsoft. And from your bio, we learned it's all about empowering digital transformation. And you've often spoken about the role of leadership and culture in successfully driving digital transformation. So can you tell us a little bit more about what this ideal culture looks like, specifically relating to inclusivity and innovation?
Yeah, let's think about how we innovate. We innovate through different ideas. That is the basis of innovation. And how can you innovate with different ideas without having different people at the table from different walks of life, different experiences, ethnicity, gender, you name it, intersectionality? It is, at the end of the day, all about diversity and inclusivity. And so digital transformation is just that. You want to think about how you transform your business outcomes, how you transform how you interact with your customers, how you transform how you get stuff done, your supply chain, all of the things in running a business. But you can't do that unless you have a culture where you have all the people, even the quietest voice in the room, able to speak up and give their input. And so when you think about how you transform and what transformation is all about, a leader's role and an individual, every one of you on this call is a leader in your own right. An individual has the opportunity and ability to include people, to provide an environment where people feel comfortable so that people can speak up, to listen intently, to be curious about what the other person is saying, and try to immerse yourself in someone else's shoes, because only then can you yourself transform, but you can also create transformative models, policies, outcomes, business solutions. I mean, just think about all the things that you're learning while at school. You're learning about what goes on in a remote part of the world where their norm is very different from your norm, but they have a problem to be solved, and you can create a business by solving that problem. But unless you know about what that problem is, you can't solve it, right? And so this notion of including differences, in harnessing the power of a culture, that's what every leader and every individual should be responsible for.
Absolutely, that's so important. It goes back to that idea of your moral compass too. And I'm curious how your current role and thinking about your journey and letting your moral compass and this desire to have impact guide you, how have your expectations for your career changed throughout your life? And are you somewhere drastically different than where you thought you would be when you were sitting in our shoes as a college student?
Oh, yes and no, right? So there are a couple of things. There are external factors that affect how you think about your life at various stages of your life. Early on in my career, I'd look at that C-suite and say, oh, that's where I want to be, because I just had that ambition to be. I thought if I were in charge, that was where I could make change. I also had this notion of I want to have a family, and I want my family to thrive. And so, making sure that as I had started to have children, that I could provide the same things and better than what I had. And so, at various stages of my career, this was about, I have high ambitions. I want to be a manager. This next ambition, whoops, I need to slow down a little bit because I want to have some children here. And so I can't be this, high powered. Can I do both? Should I do both at the expense of what, And so I had to make these choices in life. And then, as it started to mature, children get a bit older and, start to think about college and university for them. And you start to think about, Jacky, what's your purpose here? You've been purpose driven all your life, but purpose changes and it evolves and it matures and morphs into different things. And so I get to this phase of my life right now where, empty nester, everyone's gone off doing their own thing. I have a responsibility, I've always had this, but even more so to say, how can I use my platform to create an environment where women such as yourself can thrive, where when people see that they too can be, because, wow, there's this woman who's really doing things that really can influence. How can I do that? That is my purpose right now in life, right? And so I use the platform in various ways to highlight the inequities that exist in our society, to highlight the importance of inclusivity, to highlight the importance of what technology can do to create a level playing field, to bring stories to bear of what's going on in remote parts of the world where women and young girls may have to walk miles to go to school and what they could be at exposure and risk to. Highlight these stories, to highlight the stories of someone who is less privileged and less fortunate as myself to be able to do things that they would never be able to do. That is my purpose right now. And, again, yes, it has changed, but at the fabric of it has always been about wanting to just make sure I do the right thing.
Absolutely. And I that's very clear throughout your trajectory. And, when you talk about kind of using your platform to highlight these issues and highlight stories, how do you do that on a personal level in the form of mentorship or sponsorship? We often ask amazing women like yourself, how mentorship shaped your own career, and then how you kind of would advise other young women to go about finding mentors and support systems as they begin their careers.
So there are two questions in here. One in terms of how I do it, and then the second, what do I suggest? So I think I've been fortunate enough to have mentors and sponsors along the way from all walks of life, males, females, black, white, you name it, or from all around the. And I've used them as sounding boards, as advocates, as coaches, and, just to really help me when I'm struggling with things. There are times where you think you're all alone and you're like, well, no one else could have this problem. Surely no one else can have this problem that I'm having. And it's not until you speak to someone that you realize, wait a second, I'm not in this alone. And that's really important as you start to make decisions, as you start to navigate things in life, adversities that you need to overcome. And so thinking about who and when has been a deliberate agenda for me, because I need to make sure that I include people, and they come and go. So you may have someone that at this point in your career, I'm thinking about doing something special. You've been through this. Can you help me? That's been really important. I've also had and still have my personal board of directors, which includes everything from my daughter, who'll tell me when I'm not keeping it real, right? To my closest friend who says, Jacky, you've lost yourself. You haven't called us in about a year, just so that you really have a pulse on who you are and never forget, right? And so that personal board of directors is really important as well. And then I've been able to sponsor things, right? I've sponsored and created a platform in the UK where women mentors could be showcased. I've sponsored events where we can bring women together or bring diverse folks together. And so using those things have been really important to me. And so, I think your second point was, what should you do and how you think about it? There are a couple of things. You may not recognize when you are being mentored or sponsored. You may not. Someone may, you may be sitting in an airport, sitting next to someone, and airport, not right now, wrong scenario, but the point still stands. You may be sitting there talking to someone and recognize that this person has a vested interest, albeit brief, in your well-being, and give you just a snippet of sage advice that helps you go along the way. And so it's important that you understand that every interaction may be a sponsoring action, maybe a coaching action, maybe a mentoring action or relationship. And then there's how you form the formalized ones by going out there and saying, I'm really looking for a mentor. Here's where I am in my journey. Here's what I need from you, because it's important to let the mentor know what you need from them so that they're giving you what they need. And if it's not working, you feel okay to say, hey, thank you. It's been a great relationship. Let's keep in touch, and you move on. Sponsoring, again, you may not know that you're being sponsored. But again, you can be bold enough in an environment, in a role that you're working in, to go and seek out a sponsor and say, here's where I am, here's what I'm looking for. I'd really appreciate your sponsorship. Again, helping them understand why you need them and also what you can bring to the table. You guys are in a unique opportunity to reverse mentor folks so that folks can have a pulse on what's going on in today's world. Because, as you start to become more senior, you're somewhat removed. And so you may not have good line of sight into, people early in career, what they're thinking about and the things they're going through. So many opportunities. I would just encourage you, and make sure you have your personal board of directors, because as you go through life, you want to have people who help you keep it real.
Absolutely. Personal board of directors. And I love what you said about, having every interaction be meaningful, because as students, it's easy to think that we have to go out and have it be a formalized kind of relationship with a mentor. So it's great to really seek each interaction experience and what wisdom we can gain.
And I want you to, and as you think about it, because, I find that you can have a lot of anxiety about, okay, I need a mentor, I need a sponsor. And, it just, you could just go crazy just thinking about it. As you think about these meaningful relationships, you should think about it as every interaction, what it's a give-get. So I may be getting something, but what can I give as well? And then that reduces the burden of having to ask for something, because you feel you have something to give, and you always have something to give, and just know that as well.
Absolutely. It comes back to that making impact piece. Amazing. Well, I think transitioning, I'd love to get your thoughts on where technology is going, and especially with the past year that we've seen with the COVID pandemic, how that's maybe changed things. So what are the biggest key social shifts that you've noticed in the space of technology across the decades of your experience? And how has the pandemic maybe impacted or accelerated the need for digital transformation as a whole?
Yeah, I think the operative word is acceleration, because when you think about it, we've gone through various industrial revolutions where, it takes a while to adopt something, everything from the first car all the way through to the internet, and people thinking it was just something there for certain people, and it becoming mainstream, mobile, thinking, oh, is that going to become something? During the pandemic, you didn't have a choice. You were either going to adopt, or you were going to be left with not being able to work, not being able to get access to healthcare, not being able to get access to certain things. And so this notion of acceleration through crisis is what has occurred. And we've gotten to a stage where it is going to be the new norm. It's not going to change. What it's going to do is help us think about, because what it also did was highlight the disparities relative to the haves and haves not, relative to the risks associated with the supply chain, recognizing we need each other on a global scale now to solve this problem, because it's not an isolated problem that just exists over there. It's a problem for all of us. And so what technology has done is risen to the occasion to say, through technology, we can level the playing field. We can do things we never thought we'd be able to do before. We can collaborate in a global way to solve for COVID, as an example. And we can also highlight social unrest, social injustice, and things that are not right in a way that we couldn't have before. And so as you think about technology and what it can do today, the dissemination of information and misinformation, that is only going to continue to grow. It's only going to continue in terms of how we use technology for the good, tech for good, or not. And so, you asked the question, this remote working, who would have thought? There were organizations who said you have to come into the office when you work. Well, through COVID now you cannot. And so let's change how you work. And that's been a big one. Telehealth and telemedicine. I can't go into the doctor anymore for my basic triage. Can we do that remotely? And so education, look at you all. We're not in the auditorium having this discussion or in the conference room. We're remote in as far as places as Greece. And so just think about the changing nature with technology at the core of everything we do. So those are just some of the things. And as you start to now think about climate change, sustainability, how are we thinking about using technology to solve the existential problems that are only getting worse and are faster and faster becoming the things that are a threat to our existence? And so I just think scary times, exciting times, but technology has the ability to create close this digital divide, solve the existential problems, and hopefully maybe anticipate some of the problems that may occur in the future.
Absolutely. That's so interesting and important. And I think, you talked about these problems that our society is facing and technology's ability to help aid in those situations. But you also touched on the fact that you can have tech for good, or you can have tech that maybe further accelerates some of these problems. And so I'm curious, going back to this idea of a moral compass, how would you recommend we think about making sure that our impact, that positive impact that we want to make in solving these problems, is aligned with the work that we're doing? Not sure if you've thought about that through your career, or just making sure that.
So, we really have to affect outcome through policy, through education, and through collaboration. And so as each one of you embark on your career journey, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you are going into the corporate world, how can you affect policy and change? In what ways can you affect the outcomes relative to education, relative to healthcare? Use your moral compass to think about the role you play to transform lives. And so every role you take on, ask the questions, be curious, challenge the status quo, look for positions where there is accretive power and influence in what you do and how you do it, because only then can we change the outcome relative to society. And so, I think about, way early in my career, what are the roles that I wanted to play? I wanted to change things. I would ask you to do the same thing, but look to the future in terms of how you influence the outcome. And you can influence it in a way directly, or you can influence it in a way collaboratively, at scale, through the power of movements, which we do today, or working with government, collaboratively with government and academia. I mean, there's just so much we can do. And again, I look to you folks who are early in your career, who can use social media for good in a way that can truly transform in seismic ways, right? To move the dial in ways that we've never been able to do before. I mean, just putting something out there on social media can, who would have thought? And I'll go back to, again, the social justice and George Floyd, those things have been occurring throughout our lives. What's happening in Myanmar? I mean, did anyone know where Myanmar was before? And so did you, George Floyd, was it apparent to folks the nature and scale of the injustice that was occurring in underrepresented society communities when they were stopped? Did anyone understand that until you saw it for yourself? And so you can create a movement and bring awareness at scale. And I would hope that we can make change at scale based on that. And so, again, the keys will be in your hands to be able to make seismic changes in a way that our society really needs it.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, that awareness is key, and ability to use all our tools to help make that impact. Well, great. I have one more question, and then we'll do some rapid questions before getting into audience Q&A. But if you could go back, what advice would you give to your college age self?
There are always alternatives. That would be my advice, because, I started from a position of evaluating all the things that would stop me versus all the things that I could do. And, you want to start from a position of, well, if this one doesn't work out, there are always alternatives and opportunities. And I have a heightened awareness for early in career, because the anxiety that's self-inflicted, because you try to evaluate all the things that, well, if this doesn't happen, this isn't going to happen. And you could really become quite paralyzed by your thought process, quite paralyzed. And so I would ask you to say, things happen for a reason. There are always alternatives. And that, for me, would have helped me greatly. It would have reduced the anxiety. I would go into things with more of an outlook of positivity. And so for me, that was what I would tell myself.
I think that's so important and absolutely resonates with me, and I would imagine a lot of people listening in. So I think there are always alternatives. I'm going to write that in my journal so I remember. Awesome. Well, let's do some rapid fire questions, and then audience, please be sure to drop your questions in the Q&A box. We'll be getting to those in just a second. All right, Jacky, so your favorite way to relax?
A spa. Can't do it right now, but that is one favorite way.
When we can, it'll be extra wonderful.
Exactly.
Your favorite book?
Well, the most recent book was 10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World by Fareed Zakaria.
Oh, awesome. We'll have to read that one. What was your childhood dream job?
Childhood dream? Well, I never had a dream job. They're all grind jobs, but let's see. I think, the one that I thought that I really liked was going to read participating in junior achievement. That was early on, that I found to be very rewarding.
That's amazing. Do you have any new quarantine hobbies or habits?
Champagne chocolate truffles.
I love that.
That is one. And then I use my dumbbells when you sit down all day, right? And so during some meetings, I pick up my dumbbell and I do my lunges, etc. That's a habit I didn't have before, but I have it now.
That's awesome. I love the champagne chocolate truffles too. What are your guilty pleasures? Are they the champagne chocolate truffles, or?
They are the guilty pleasures as well.
Who's your role model?
So my biggest role model was my father, by far. The ability to be stoic through adversity, never let on, his mantra of never looking down on anyone unless you're picking them up. It was somebody that I role model, that role model. I try at least.
Absolutely. Wow. And then finally, the best advice you've ever received.
The best advice I've ever received. Well, it really was about don't be too hard on yourself, because I was, early on always really hard on myself, and it really helped me think about who I am and what, there are always alternatives.
Absolutely. I love that one. Well, gosh, thank you so much, Jacky. And I'm going to pass it over to Ashley.
All right. Thanks, Brooke. That was great fun.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jacky, for all of your wonderful insights. Now we're going to hop over to audience questions. So a reminder, if you haven't submitted your questions yet, go ahead and put them in the Q&A feature. To start off, we have a question from Enrita, who wants to know, how would you recommend breaking into a new field in which we might not have much job or internship experience, especially when it's hard to convince people to take a chance on us because we are BIPOC women?
So I think there are a couple of things here. I think you need to think about those innate skills that you bring to the table and those special skills that you may not think are special skills. I mean, for example, do you work well with individuals? Are you creative? Are you an extrovert or an introvert, and what can you do there? I really think that the thought process about eliminating ourselves from a job, we need to remove that and say what we bring to the table in the skills that are universal, and how we apply them is what is the high order bit. And so, you look at a job description and you see all the things that they think they need, and you immediately say, well, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do that. But you probably can, because you bring analytical skills to the table, you bring a sense of camaraderie, you know how to collaborate, these are the skills, you're a strong communicator. And so I'd say write down those things. And then as you go into a field that you may not be equipped for yet, because that's many of the things, how do you create your elevator pitch about why you, right? And you use those things and you reinforce those things as the things that you bring to the table. At the end of the day, it's all about relationships. You could be the best coder, but if no one knows you're coding, all you are is the best coder. So remember, relationships are key. And so how you go into the discussion, how you assess the individual to kind of make sure that you make a connection, ask questions, find common ground, and then bring to bear the things that you have as your secret superpowers, which every one of us does have. And then the last thing I would say is it's all about mindset. You start from a position that you assume positive intent. So don't start from a position, well, this person's not going to want me, they're going to think I can't do it. You start from a position that says, this person knows nothing about me, but they're really interested and curious about what I bring to the table. And if you start from that position, then you go in with confidence, thinking positively, bringing to bear. And if it doesn't work out, it wasn't the one for you. There are always alternatives. I mean, I can't tell you how many jobs I applied for earlier in my career before I landed a job. And in hindsight, those weren't the right jobs for me anyway. Look where I am. And so again, mindset is really, really key.
Thank you. I think that's great. Yeah, talking about your secret superpowers and always having a positive mindset is super helpful. Our next question is from an anonymous attendee, and she asks, how do you become continually cognizant and in tune with your moral compass when at times the ventures you step into are not the most moral?
Yeah. So I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself. I speak up when things are not right. It is my responsibility as an individual to speak up. And so, your point about you may be in a situation that is not go with your gut is where I start from. And if your gut is not right, then it probably isn't right. And then speaking up and out is the way I handle it. And yes, it may not work out to your advantage. You may have to step aside. You may have to go do something, but at the end of the day, you can live with yourself. And so for me personally, that is how I do it. It may not be everyone, but I know for me, at the end of the day, I have to go with my gut, and it is my moral responsibility to do the right thing. So hopefully that helps. And again, if your gut says it's not right, it probably isn't. And speaking up and speaking out is the way to make sure that you're doing the right thing. Be courageous.
That's great to hear. I guess building off of that, you know, if you're open to share, what is one of the most difficult decisions you've had to make either while at Microsoft or at a different point in career? And what was that like for you?
So one of the difficult ones was I had a boss that in my mind was an abusive boss. It wasn't at Microsoft, but it was many years ago. And I remember him speaking very poorly to one of my peers, and my peer saying, I have children, I have mouths to, I have to put up with this. And me saying, hell no, I'm not putting up with this. I'll be, if I'm going to let this happen. And actually having an interaction with my boss when he tried to do it to me. And two things occurred. One is I realized I was lowering myself to his standards, because then I started bantering with him and I shouldn't have. And so then I stepped back and said, wait a second, Jacky, this isn't the way to approach this. And then I made the tough decision that says, I'm going to leave this because I'm not going to put up with it. Because at the end of the day, my health and well-being was at stake here. And if I was going to be sick, it wasn't going to help me or my family. So I needed to do something differently. And so I made the tough decision at that point, which I was in a really great role. It was a position that a coveted position, but it wasn't worth my health. It wasn't worth my well-being or my moral fortitude to sit there and accept that. So that's the decision I made.
That's great to hear and so brave. And I think something we can definitely, all learn from. I think, we've kind of learned from talking to you, you're not afraid to take, big risks and big steps. And I'd love to hear kind of how your approach to risk taking has changed over the last few years, and kind of, how you deal with that in your day-to-day life when you take risks and when you don't.
Yeah. So I'd start by saying it's calculated risks, right? And so, and risks takes on various forms. I know what I'm willing to accept and what I'm not willing to accept. I know what my threshold and tolerance for taking chances are, right? And, you may sit in a conference room and you say to yourself, this meeting is not going the way I want it to go. To what expense do I want to really agitate? And what's it worth to me? And should I sweat the small stuff? Will we get there? Will I not? And so you take these, you make these evaluations every day in life. Should I take this job? Should I not? Should I go down the road and go get a cup of coffee, or should I not? Life is about choices and taking chances and risks. And so for me, it is about calculated risks. And so how I evaluate them are based on what my threshold is and what's non-negotiable. I know what's non-negotiable. I will not be in an environment where we are not doing the right thing for people. I will not. I will stand up and I will shout from the highest mountain. And if it costs me my job, it will cost me, because at the end of the day, I need to do right. And that's non-negotiable for me. I may negotiate in terms of something that I believe is not the right approach to an innovation, because I know it's in the best interest of the team for us to go down this route. Although for me, I didn't think it was the best, but I'm willing to work with the team to do that. And so again, it may come with experience in terms of how you evaluate, but you start from a place that says what's non-negotiable for me. And at the end of the day, you don't do things that are non-compliant, and you operate with integrity at all times. And so that's how I start out, and it served me throughout my life.
That's great. You know, I think I agree. Always standing up, right? Even when it's hard, it sounds like, you know, you have to do it and it's the right thing to do. Shifting gears a little bit, we have a question from Kendall. How would you, what advice would you give to the next generation of female tech leaders to marry social impact with a competitive career in the private sector?
Yeah, so the one thing I would say in the private sector is, surprisingly enough, everyone is focused now on social impact. Another outcome of COVID, right? And so I would say that we are now at the opportune time to seize the opportunity to make sure that when you go into the private sector and you take a role, you let it be clear and known that part of what you want to be able to do is have social impact. State that as part of your role. Now, it may not come to fruition immediately, but it be in the minds of the person who hires you that says this person cares about social impact as part of their role. And we can do this collectively. And so that's what I would ask as you go into tech, you know, tech for good. As you're designing something, you may say, hey, is this accessible to all? Can a person who's hard of hearing use this? Can a person who can't see? Ask those questions to create inclusive environments, inclusive technologies and solutions, and inclusive outcomes. And always have that at the forefront of your mind.
That's great. I mean, I definitely agree. In the last couple of years, we've seen big changes. Where do you think, you know, in 20 years, someone asked in the chat, where do you think tech's going to go? What changes will occur?
So I think there are a couple of things that will prevail relative to technology. We will always be having ethical discussions because we'll be at a place where artificial intelligence will take on forms that we would have never imagined. And so at the heart of all the things we do will be responsible AI and ethics at the core of technology. We'll always also be thinking about, as we use technology, what does it do to people's lives? We don't recognize the correlation today. We may talk about it a little bit, you know, disrupting jobs, etc., but it will be core in the future. So every time we embark on a technological innovation or something that changes how we do things, the next question will be, what does it mean for the human being? What does it mean for how we operate in a social construct? What does it mean as we think about the environment? There'll be top questions that we will ask every time. Will it affect the environment? What will it do to people's lives? What will the social construct look like as we start to embrace this? All of those things. How will we think about it when we're thinking about the brain? I mean, there's just certain things that will always come into bear. And that is where we will be. I can't tell you where we'll be, whether we'll be on Mars, Pluto, Venus, I can't tell you. But I will tell you that those things, technology, that convergence of technology and how we live our lives will just be the way we think about technology all the time.
That's super interesting. I guess building off of that, where do you see yourself going in your career next? And do you think, you know, some of these technological changes you're talking about will affect your day-to-day life and what you do?
Yeah, where will I go next? That's $1 million question, isn't it? You know, I thought about, you know, I think I've been blessed and privileged to have done so much, traveled so many places. I want my next career, whatever that may be, to be influencing at scale in a way that I would never have imagined. And I don't know what that looks like, whether it be a professor, whether it be in the UN, whether it be somewhere that can affect us globally, or whether I help rally a movement. I haven't thought about it, but I know that I want to continue to do what I do now in helping our society be a better place for all, so that everyone can achieve what their dreams.
That's
Sounds
great.
it sounds a bit philosophical, Ashley, but it really is about that, you know. I am blessed to not have to worry about where my next meal is coming from, but there are millions of people who do. And so what can I do to change that? Right? There are millions of people who get up every morning and cannot walk, cannot do the basic things that I've been blessed and privileged to be able to do. How can I help them? That's my life.
I love that. I think that's, a perfect way to end. It's so inspiring to hear kind of how you've taken your privilege and your journey and everything you've been able to experience and wanting to give it back to others. And this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing and for being so open and for all of your insights and advice you've given us. We really appreciate it.
Now I look to see great things come out of the Stanford Women in Business.
Yes, I'm sure you will, starting now and years down the road. Well, thank you so much. For everyone else who is on the call, wanted to give a quick reminder that SWIB's spring internships applications are now open. This year, we're offering part and full-time internships in a variety of different industries, in tech, finance, marketing, social media, and much more. So you can go ahead and visit stanfordwomeninbusiness.com/springternships for more information and to find the application link. We also have events for Tech Week happening on Wednesday and Friday, so we hope that you guys will be able to join us there. Once again, thank you so much, Jacky, and thank you everyone for attending this event. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacky.
Hopefully, we stopped recording.